golden river, sun and water all my own. Yet I was never alone. Sun and water, oh life givers, I'll have them where'er I roam. And I was not far from home. Sunlight glancing on the water, life and death are all my own. Yet I was never alone. Life to raise my sons and daughters, golden sparkles in the foam. And I was not far.
Is everybody here a member of the Reedville Fishermen's Museum? Would you raise your hand if you're a member? Yeah, I thought so. If you're members of the Reedville Fishermen's Museum, then you already know our Master of Ceremonies, Spud Parker. Spud has been a volunteer for the museum for many, many years, and his pride and joy and passion has been the restoration, the maintenance, and the operation of a 1922 deck boat, the Elvis C, that's on the National Register of Historic Places. We recently asked regional artist Ann Smith, we commissioned her to make a painting of the Elvis C, and she has done so. And today, if you please, I would like to present a signed and numbered print of that painting to the captain of the Elvis C, and certainly a fine and honored volunteer at the Reedville Fishermen's Museum, our own host and MC, Mr. Spud Parker. Now, Spud, if you look real carefully, do you see that? No, that guy's much younger than you, Spud. But if you look in behind the wheel, you see the shadow of that crabby-faced old man?
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah. I think that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, my friend.
Thank you.
We need more people like
You all can all go home now. That's all we have this afternoon. Well, thank you, Chuck. Thank you for your applause. It's a pleasurable activity. There's no question about that. Of course, when I have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to take a pound net trip out, leaving at 5:30, it's not always that pleasurable. But I suspect that most of you are familiar with these programs that we have, that a group of people, Dennis Delpino, our chief photographer and head oral history man, started about 3 or 4 years ago with Donald George and with Ann Davis to put together this collection of videos of conversations with people with memories of this part of the world. And this part of the world has lots and lots of wonderful memories, particularly for those of us who have come here fairly recently. Then we got the idea of using, and those videos are going to be kept at the museum as part of the collection. Then we got the idea of presenting parts of them publicly, and that's become the Remembering Reedville program. And the format is that we will show only a portion of a conversation with 3 people today, and then in most cases we'll have a little discussion after that, answering questions or making additions to this thing and so forth. We'll have 3 presentations, and then we'll have we do have some light refreshments over in the corner afterwards. Very informal, very informal. But the first presentation will be a part of a conversation that the oral history team had with Captain Henry Dixon about an unfortunate experience that he had with his Menhaden boat. Captain Dixon is unusual, it seems to me, because well, I guess you'd have to say he's sort of a come here. Isn't that fair to say that and it reminds me of myself, actually. He came down here this part of the world as a boy at a camp over in Kilmarnock, if I have that straight, and got fascinated by the water, got fascinated by the watermen who made their living there, and befriended them, hung out with them, got to know them, and so forth, to the point where he ultimately became a captain of a Menhaden boat. So, Dennis, we can go right ahead with that.
And I stayed on her until the Atlantic surf came out. And then we had the misfortune of sinking her, and they changed the name of her to the Atlantic Shore. In fact, we sunk her going right in the mouth of Cockles Creek. We had been fishing down in the Thimble area, and we was the onlyest boat down there. And we had real good fishing. Had an airplane pilot down there that loved to fly down there named George Cartwright. Doesn't anybody even to this day like to fly down there, but he loved it down there. And he gave me a lot of help. And I had a very good crew. And we put all the fish on the Atlantic surf that we could put on them. We had them boarded up until they was shoveled over top of the fish pump screen. And when we was coming up the bay, we had everything closed. We had our decks in the water. Hadn't even took the purse boats up. When we got through pumping, we had the decks in the water. The Atlantic boats had a great big hatch on top of the engine room that you could take off to get engines and stuff out, or a generator or something went bad. So we had a ladder down there for the chief and second to get in the engine room. Well, that spring, my chief engineer had put a hatch back over top of the quadrant room on the stern of her. Well, when we was running up the bay, he had taken the top off of that hatch, and I didn't know it. Well, from the time we ran from Thimble all the way to Cockles Creek, 4.5 hours, she had been putting water in the engine room and the quadrant room. Well, we was going to change nets when we got in because we was getting in early. And when we came around Fleeting Point, with the decks already in the water, the engineer opened the engine room door up, and water started running in. Instead of him pulling the door shut, he turned around and ran away from it. And they was great big doors they have on those Atlantic boats, and she was already sunk, and it wasn't sunk from water coming in the quadrant room, sunk from water coming in the door. And in a matter of 90 seconds, she was on the bottom. Water had ran in the engine room, hit the refrigeration system, cut the generators off. We had a cloud of ammonia sitting over top of her, where that water hit that hot refrigeration system, blew all the safeties off. The men were scared right to death. They was running, getting ready to jump overboard, and I had to use some pretty tough language to get them quieted down. And thank the good Lord, didn't nobody get hurt, and we didn't lose anything but the boat. She stayed sunk there for 30 days. And we had Norfolk ship to come up here and get her. And they brought the cranes and stuff up. In fact, I'm going to show you a crane with a picture of her sunk shortly. And they got her up. We carried her over to Humphreys Railway. Still had the fish in her. And you would not believe, when we got to the bottom of them, some of the fish was just as whole as to where the day we caught them. But we had to get the vacuum pumps. We couldn't pump no fish, no kind of way with nothing handle them. So we had to use the same system that they use for pumping septic systems. And the only way that we had a big enough rig to do it, we had 2 trucks that pumped the bilges out with these vacuum pumps out of Norfolk to come up here. We had Scott Townsend, who owned Central Systems in Kilmarnock. He had a dumping pit up there, and we was dumping that all in his dumping pit. In time we had it all dumped, everybody started to fuss about it because it was smelling so bad. But they went up there, and I think they put 400 or 500 pounds of lime all over top of it and quieted everything down. But we worked on the boat. She had a big D99 Caterpillars in her for main power. We took those out, put 149/16 GMs on her, rebuilt all the generators and all the ice machines, went through her thoroughly. I mean, the whole boat. And we went back fishing at the end of October.
What year was that?
I think that, I might be wrong, but I believe it was in 1978.
78.
I'm not too good on remembering all these years, but I believe it was 78.
In a good time context. Yeah.
But it was, we was having a big year. We was really, and the fish hadn't even got here then. The fish showed up after we were sunk.
Captain Dixon, you want to add to that?
I'm Henry Dixon with the Manhattan business is left of him. Supposed to be retired, but still fishing. Just got off a shell boat 3 weeks ago on a Friday, got on a fish boat Sunday night, had a big week to next week. But anyhow, talking about the Atlantic surf and the Atlantic shore, she was a nice fish boat. She was fast. She carried a lot of fish. And I had brought her out when they converted her, and I was really proud of her. I took good care of her, kept her in good shape, had a good crew of men, good engineers, good pilots, good mate. The whole operation was what a fish boat captain dreams of, until I made the mistake of putting too many fish on her. I wouldn't like to say this in front of the Coast Guard, even though they've closed the case, but I had her overgrossed. But when you get a chance to really pile her up, and every boat on the Chesapeake Bay is up here, and you're in the bottom, and you know nobody else is catching any fish, you take your time, and they still do, and put them on them, and put them on them, and put them on them. And that's probably was the biggest error that I made. And finally, Captain Leland Robinson was coming down the bay, and this airplane pilot that you heard him mention about, George Cartwright, he said to me, he said, Henry, he said, I got one more bunch of fish up here, it's got 100,000 in it. Says, is there any way you can get it on that boat? I said, George, I'm already loaded. He said, I know it, but it's one of them blue boats coming down here. So I went over there, got the chief, I said, look, I want you to pump every drop of refrigeration water that's in this boat out. We're going to put one more on her. So then we made that set, and like I said, we piled her up. Water was coming in the engine room through the doors in. We had them all shut. But anyway, we came up on all the way up the bay, slick cam. Got right here, looking right at the dock in Cockles Creek with 2 million fish on them. And the factory didn't even believe it when we hailed her 2 million, but she would carry 1,800. So I figured with what we had shoveled on her, we had 2 more 100,000 on them. And we come around the turn. That's when all the action started happening. The door was open. The water was running in the engine room, and I didn't even know about the back hatch with the cover off of that. It was just awful. In a matter of about 10 or 15 seconds, she was on the bottom. And I suffered from then on. I think we had already caught 28 million fish that summer, and that 2 million, because we was talking about it, was going to turn 30 million for us. And that was in July, so we was headed for a tremendous fish season. But it ended up, it didn't have none that summer, but I was very fortunate. Got her back, went down to North Carolina, and had 33 million down there. So I ended up with a big year anyhow. But the Atlantic shore, that's what I always want to call her, was a fine boat, and I just didn't do it right.
Mr. Dixon, did they call you Eddie Boy when you were a young man?
That's me,
Did you live next door to a little girl named Doris on Windsor Avenue?
Doris Durrett.
She's sitting right here.
I see her sitting there.
I hired her 55 years ago.
Yeah. And your name must be Mr. Donald Roby. That's right. That's right. But that's how I got down here. My mother had passed away. My dad had 3 boys, and we were starting to grow up a little bit. Running over to Washington over on 9th Street, cost a dime to go over there on an AB&W bus. Playing hooky from school, sort of getting in a bad crowd. And he moved us down here, and that's how we ended up being in the Northern Neck. Best move my dad ever made. But I want to tell you a little something. You're very fortunate to have Reedville, the last fishing community on the whole East Coast, not only for menhaden, but for pound netting, gill netting, crabbing, oystering. It's still a fishing village. And when you ride down the street, you look at it, it's something to be proud of. The next thing to be proud of is all of the best fish boat captains, all of the best crew, all of that comes from this area in Lancaster County. And it's quite a few of them that comes from the Reedville area. You had Captain John Larry, Captain Lynn Larry, all the Haneys, Captain Russell Haney, Captain Manuel Haney, the Fred Haneys. It was just everybody, you know. This is where they come, and they still come. When they're looking for a captain, they come to Northumberland, Lancaster County to go anywhere in the Gulf, and they are the best. I thank you.
Thank you, sir. Those are important words about Reedville. We want to try to keep it special as long as we can. It's not going to be easy. I heard rumors, or we've been hearing rumors, that there was all kinds of activity on the shore while the ship was sunk out there. And I'm wondering if anybody has memories that they could share with us about that. Somebody must. Mariah? I knew I was going to. I told you I was going to get you, and nobody else came forward.
Well, mainly I remember all the young people who had a skiff with a motor or oars or anything else would take passengers out for a few cents out to circle the boat and see what was going on. Very exciting. Little skiffs and things all over the creek.
Entrepreneurial spirit at Reedville. And any other memories about that? Oh, dear. It reminds me of my classes when I was teaching. Try to get some response from them, and they just sit there and look at you. All right, we will move on then and hear from Dr. Emery Lewis, whose family came to these parts in around 1920, right, Emery? Yes. Your forebears and so forth, talking about his father, Captain Wallace, who fits the term of legend as well as any human being I've ever heard of. So we'll roll it there. Dennis?
Things Wallace loved to do was, in the wintertime, he loved to hunt. And Dameron's Marsh is only 3-4 miles south of us, was where he liked to hunt. And as a young man, he was a market hunter. In other words, he'd catch or shoot geese, ducks, and sell them. A pair of black ducks would bring $1, a goose would bring $1. There was a boat that came from Chrisville that would anchor out in the harbor here, and it was Captain Oss Daly. He'd come over 2 or 3 times a week buy geese, muskrats, oysters, crabs in the summertime, whatever was crawling or going around. And that made a market for these ducks and geese. Of course, Wallace and the rest of them that hunted in those days, they weren't exactly legal. The way they'd hunt was they'd hunt at night. And they had a skiff, we called them Sharpies. They were about 14, 16 feet long, a point on each end, the name Sharpie, planked the long way. Most boats are planked the short way, but these were planked the long way. Supposedly you could shove them straighter through the water. And they were low to the water, usually paint them gray or some dark color that wouldn't show up at night. And they'd take a lard tin, cut the lard tin half in two the long way, cut a little hole in the back and put a light bulb in it, hook the light bulb to a battery, and go down to Dameron's marshes. You'd hear geese honking or ducks quacking, hook up your light, have the plugs out of your shotgun so you'd hold 5 shells to kill more game. And we had oars. They were really not oars, they were sticks that were, maybe an inch wide and tapered on both sides so you could slide them through the water and push and slide it through the water without pulling up and making a splash or water dripping. And that's what you'd pole or push with at night. Usually have 2 men in the boat. The man up in the bow would put his oar in the boat when you got close to the ducks or geese. And when you got close to them, they'd get into a tight knot. And just before they took off, they'd swim in little circles. So it was a matter of timing, because if you waited too late, they'd fly and get away. So you had to shoot at just the right time. The man in back, usually my father, would push, and when he got to the point that he thought it was time to shoot, he'd touch the man in front. That meant he was putting his oar down, get your gun up, and Wallace would get his gun up, and the man in front would shoot one side, the man in back would shoot to the other, and depending on whether you're left or right-handed. But yeah, they spent many nights, Captain Charles Williams and Rudolph Waller and just so many men around here that used to hunt. And they had codes. Used to have party lines, party telephone lines, so if Charles wanted to go hunting with Wallace on a particular night, he'd call maybe around 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon and say, have the chickens been fed? That meant, have you put bait out for the ducks? And there would be yes or no. And then there was something about, what's the weather report? And if the weather report was good, that meant they'd go. And if the weather report was bad, that meant if there were some people around or a game warden or whatever, then weather wasn't going to be good, so they wouldn't go. But yeah, so many a night you'd spend down there on Dameron's Marsh or out in the water from Dameron's Marsh hunting. And one of the things that I remember so well, one night they were pushing around the shore, and there was a group of otter playing, and somehow the light blinded this otter, and they came in the boat. At least 2 of them got in the boat, and Manuel Haney and Wallace got out of the boat, and Manuel had presence of mind to shoot to kill some of those otter, and Manuel said, well, he didn't want them, so Wallace brought them home, and my mother had this pretty otter stole that she wore around her neck for years, and there were 2 of those otter. And I remember one time when Captain Burnish Shelton was hunting with him, they got so close to the geese, when they shot, the geese flew right into him, and Captain Burnish put his hand up to protect himself and caught a goose right by the neck. So a lot of story, a lot of interesting things, and you'd say, well, it could never happen, but in the dark of night, a lot of things happen. Wallace, one of the funniest stories about hunting to me was his 9-barrel gun episode. As I said, Wallace liked to kill as many ducks or geese as he could, because the more he killed, the more money he made and the more he enjoyed it. He found out that there had been a battery gun, is what they call it, a multiple barrel gun, and Captain Otis Douglas and Virgil Hughes' father, and I can't remember his name, but Captain Hughes, had made this gun and had hunted with it early on. Now it's up to 1930 something, and Wallace wants to kill as much as he can, so Captain Otis is I'm not sure if he was dead at the time, but anyway, he talked to Mr. Hughes and said, I'd like to try out that gun you all have, that multiple barrel gun. And Mr. Hughes said, Wallace, it's too dangerous, and I promised Captain Otis that I would never loan it to anybody. So Wallace said, well, I sure like to try it. And he said, well, I'll tell you what. He said, I didn't promise him I wouldn't sell it. He said, have you got any money on you? And Wallace said, no, I don't have any money. He said, you don't have anything? He said, well, I've got a dime. He said, well, give me the dime. So he reached in his pocket and gave him the dime, and he sold him this 11-barrel gun for a dime. Well, when they went in the garage, the barn, to get the gun, 2 of the barrels, I guess from salt water, had rusted so much they weren't operable. So they had to take those 2 barrels off, so it made it a 9-barrel gun. And the story Wallace told was that Mr. Hughes said, now Wallace, you take one of these measures and you do it half full of black powder. You set the gun up, put the half measure of black powder in each barrel, then you wad up some newspaper and ram each one down, and you take a half measure of shot, lead shot, and put in each barrel, and more newspaper and ram it down. You lay the gun down, you tie it. It had some eyes in the block of wood that the gun, the barrels were mounted on. You tie it to the bow of your boat and said, this trough, that's your firing trough. You put the black powder in there, and there's a little hole in each barrel. That's where the fire goes to the barrel and makes the explosion. He said, but when you're pushing, you got to be very careful not to let water spray up on that black powder, or you'll have a misfire and you might hurt yourself. So Wallace listened to all of it, and he took that gun down to Dameron's Marsh. He was really anxious to get it going, but before he took it down there, he thought, you know, I'm going to put a little cover over that trough that I put the black powder in so water won't get on it. So he bent some metal, some tin, and just made a little cover. And he thought about that rope tying that gun on. He said, you know, that's going to be mighty slow, and especially if the game warden comes, I don't want to have to be untying knots or cutting rope trying to get it thrown overboard. So he made some iron hooks, and he could just hook them right in those eyes, and you could take the thing on and off in just a few seconds. So knowing that, he went on down to the marshes, and it was a calm night. He heard some geese honking. He rammed the gun with powder and shot, but like most watermen, he thought if a half a measure is good, then a whole measure is going to be better. So he loaded up with lead and powder and put his trough over the cover over the trough, and hooked his hooks in, got her all set, and started pushing towards the geese he heard honking. Well, he got close to them, but when he got close, he realized it was only 3 geese instead of a large flock. But he was so anxious to try the gun, he touched the wires to the battery. The wires ran through the trough. That caused the explosion. And he said many times, the first thing in orbit wasn't the Sputnik. It was that trough cover. When those explosions went, and that power shot, so that thing went by his head, and he knows it went into orbit. The trouble was, with all that black powder, that makes a lot of smoke, and with no wind blowing, there was nothing to clear it up. So Wallace had to wait for a few minutes for that black powder to sort of clear. Yeah. Well, while he was waiting, he realized why they had tied the gun on with rope, because it absorbed some shock. And with the iron hooks he had, there was no shock. It had opened up the bow of his boat. And while he's waiting for the black powder to clear away, the boat sunk. Well, he was only in 3 feet of water, so it wasn't all that bad. But anyway, boat sunk. Noise, he said he could hear it echoing off of every point up here. It sounded like a cannon, like a bomb. So he's overboard anyway. So he said, well, I'm going to walk out here and see what I've killed, pick up the geese. And when he got out there, he found little pieces about the size of his hand, the bill of the one, the feet of the other, not a piece big enough to eat. So he'd blown them to smithereens. Anyway, that was his first time with that 9-barrel gun.
Emery, come up and add to that or answer questions or whatever you will. Are there any game wardens in the audience?
No game wardens here.
you home. In that interview, I talked about the light that they used to use. This is, some of you may recognize, a lard tin, and it's been cut. And this used to be shiny 40 years ago. But we put a little light bulb in the back, and you'd put this up on the bow of your skiff and hook this to a battery, and that would be the light. And the way it worked was you'd be a long way away from the ducks or geese at first, and you'd push up, and as they saw that light approaching, they'd get into a real close little huddle, a group, and yeah, that's when your opportunity came. I was thinking about that. We talked about getting $1 for a goose or $1 for a pair of black ducks. $1 doesn't seem like much now, but back in the 1920s, that was a lot of money. My father's first job was a welder, and he was getting $1.50 a day, and that was a 12-hour day. So he could make more money at night sometimes than he could during the day. Anyway, this is that little model. I think it may show. It was a Sharpie. I think the last one of these we had Captain Charles Williams, and my father built one in the garage, and I remember as a little boy watching him build it, but it was sharp on each end, and you'd kneel or sit on the seat, but most of the time you'd kneel to get as low as possible in the boat and push. One man would push on one side and the other on the other to get up on the ducks or geese. But the 9-barrel gun, I never saw it. It was used before my time, but the story was my father gave it to one of the old game wardens. He'd been trying to catch him for years, and after they stopped using it, the fellow's name was Stuart Blackwell. I think there was only one game warden around in those days, but they were sort of like arch enemies. One was trying to outsmart the other. But anyway, he gave that gun to Stuart Blackwell and some of the federal game wardens. It went to Richmond, and I thought I'd found it a few years ago over on the Eastern Shore. We went over there, and that was a wild goose chase. It turned out not to be the gun. There were other guns like that, but as far as I know, this was the only 9-barrel gun. Anyway, that's what we're talking about, putting the powder in, and then the wine and the shot and some more wine. And there was a trough here. We put the powder in. You all may not be able to see that.
I'm not going to lift it up.
Yeah. Anyway, it worked, and very noisy, a lot of recoil, and if you had a large flock of ducks or geese, you could make a nice work.
What was the most ducks or geese you ever remember them killing in one night?
Well, your granddaddy, Captain Charles, and Wallace, and I remember going as a little boy, I might have been 9 or 10 years old, had 54. I remember we put them in the back of the truck, but in those days they'd stopped selling them, and we rode all around Reedville giving them away, trying to give them away, because nobody wanted to pick that many ducks. Yeah, that was about the most I remember. It was nearly a truckload of them. Yeah. No, haven't fired that model. No.
Ernie's back in the back.
Oh yeah, that was another story. We had been hunting one night down at the marsh. Ernie asked if ever two boats ran together. Well, one night Wallace and I had been hunting, and we were coming back from a hunting trip, and it turned out there were 3 other men out in a skiff. We had no lights on because we didn't want anybody to see us. These other folks were out getting a mess of oysters illegally, and they didn't have any lights on. And it just so happened the 2 boats ran together. We thought we'd hit a beacon, a buoy with no light on it. And the fellows getting the oysters were pretty sure it was a game warden that had rammed them. And we checked our boat to make sure we weren't leaking or taking any water on. And we could hear a lot of cussing and fussing. And it turned out that the other fellows were our friends. They grew up right in Fleeton. So after we found out who was who and what had happened, we had to tow the other boat in because their boat was small and we'd hit them broadside. and they were leaking a little bit. So we pulled them in and pulled the boat up, pulled it out of the water, and see what damage they'd done. And after we saw that nobody was hurt and the boat's just a little bit of damage, the funniest part of the story to me was this one fellow, Claiborne Corsa, had on hip boots, and after we made a damage assessment, Claiborne took off his boot and poured water out of it, and we said, "What, did you get overboard?" He said, "No, I got so scared I peed right in my boots." That was the highlight of that trip. Anything else? Yeah. I think it's probably always been illegal, but that Dameron's Marsh now is a protected, it's a game, a protected area. But that was some of the best hunting territory around. And those marshes have washed a lot. There used to be a big island with trees and all on it, and that's completely gone now. But, you know, storms, hurricanes, one thing and another, it's completely washed away. You know, I don't even know. That was never discussed.
And never caught, I guess.
Never caught. The closest they ever came to getting caught, Captain Manuel Haney and Wallace, Charles Williams, I think it was 4 of them, went down to go hunting on this marsh one evening. Now, this was just with the shotguns. And they got down there early, and it was in the wintertime and a real low tide, so they said, well, we've got some time before it gets dark, because they'd only hunt when the ducks would come in to get the bait they'd put out, and that would be right at the edge of dark. So they put their guns over in some of the bushes on the island, and they walked around and picked up oysters, and the game warden had watched them. And when they went around away from the guns, he went and got their guns. Well, it was snow, and he could just follow their footsteps. So he called my father a day or two later and said, I found 3 or 4 automatic shotguns down on Dameron's Marsh. If they're yours, come over and claim them. And nobody ever claimed them. that was a bad enough penalty right there.
So the fine was 4 shotguns. Now, our final segment is a little bit different. Before we used the electronics and the DVDs and so forth with Remembering Reedville, we just gathered a panel of 3 or 4 folks who would talk about growing up in Reedville and so forth. And what we're going to show now is a clip from one of those. Dennis did videotape it. We're going to show a clip from those, and as many of you will anticipate, this is sort of bittersweet because the speaker is Steve Pruitt, who, as you will see, and those many of you know, was a marvelously pleasant, amusing, sensitive, and interesting person, but who unfortunately passed on not too long after this video was made. So that's why it's bittersweet. It's nice to see Steve again, but it hurts that he's gone.
I hope you all can understand me, but first thing to do, make fun of the way I talk, but I'm trying hard to get rid of it. But I don't know what I'm doing here. Right on my right, there's enough history in this Rice family to write a book on about Reedville. But anyway, I've been coming to Reedville ever since I was ever since I can remember. First place I ever rode in a car was here in Reedville. A fellow by the name of Charlie Crockett, the barber, took me for a ride. Went down to a store down here where Barnes is now, old store was there. And I thought that was the greatest thing. When I got back home, I had a story to tell them. How I rode in a car, but anyway, it's a great place for a waterman to come, was Reedville. And my daddy, he well, we all called him Pop, so if I call him Pop, it's my daddy I'm talking about. But we used to come in Reedville here and load with fish and go on to Washington in the spring of the year if we wasn't running grain. But we'd go to the ice plant. Well, they made ice there, 300-pound cakes, about 50 tanks of them. Cut them up in 100-pound chunks and grind them up and shoot it right in the hole, fish hole. And it was. Then water, Pop thought this was the greatest water ever was, and it was good water. And they had a flowing, now we called it a flowing pump. It was an artesian well that flowed constantly. And you had to catch it in a bucket. And I don't care if we had watered up in Cape Charles or Norfolk coming through, we had to dump that barrel of water and get a fresh barrel of Reedville water because it was good water. And I was the water boy because that's all I could do was throw the bucket and clean the pilot house. That's all my job was back there then. But you take on the left of the ice plant there, well, facing it on the right was the best machine shop in the world, Captain Mitchell. I'm doing two-wheel. But on those old slow-turning engines, diesels and gas, he could make anything you wanted that you needed. He'd work all night if you wanted, him and Graydon. But they had an old barge that had a house on it. And that's where he got his name, Fleeting Machine Works. They used to tow that barge to Fleeting every morning. So evidently they must have had the barge before they did the machine shop up here. But I don't remember that far back. I can go back far enough. But you had on the right there was Rudolph Walters, oil dock, and he was a great guy. He'd come any time of night that you wanted to fuel up, but behind him was another little shop, a Mr. Edwards, when I was real small, a Mr. Edwards, some of George Edwards' people, his daddy or something, but he run something like a little small machine shop behind Rudolph Walters' office. And I know he called Poppy and my dad in and gave him a little 5-piece crankshaft he made as a watch fob. Back there then when you wore pocket watches and in the middle they had a watch fob. And he reached up on the shelf and pulled a little small grappling anchor that he had made, 5-prong anchor. He said, "Here, son, here's something for you." Well, I was the richest boy on Tangier when I got, of course everybody played with a little boat in the ditch. Over here, I guess you use automobile cars. But I had, well, when I got home, I didn't hardly use that anchor. Pop wouldn't let me take it out the house. He knew I was going to lose it or something was going to happen to it. That went into china closet. The curio cabinet, I guess you call it now, but we called it a china closet. And that's where it was until they both passed away. And when I got it over home now, the same little grappling that Mr. Edwards gave me. Here, Phil, you tell him something.
No, you're doing really well.
Yeah, I am.
You're on rules. Ain't no one to say you.
But it was, well, you had the best to us, that Weaver's food store right straight across from the old fish dock was Weaver's food store, excuse me. And that was, well, that was like food line to us. You had 2 or 3 different kinds of bread you could pick from, 2 or 3 kinds of butter. I know before we go home, Pop would always get 2 or 3 round, they called it prints. It was country butter, we called it, made right here. It always had a big flower in the middle or a 4-leaf clover, but that was great butter. He was going to have his prints of butter when he went home, but he used to love to get out in front of the store in the summer where all the older people used to sit on benches, and he was in his glory then. But alongside of the grocery store was the drugstore. It was the same building, but it had a partition down between it, and that separated them. But it was a great one. You had a lot of tables, you had a lot of booze, and you had a nice bar. And when I got a little older and was one of the employees being paid, of course, Pop didn't pay a whole lot to start with. There was a girl in there, Connie Haney was her name, worked in there. And when we all used to crab drudge over here, Tan Germans was like wolves or something. They went in packs, and they did. But whatever that first one ordered when they went in the door, most of the time, everyone was going to order the same thing. And I know I was going in the door, and this whole line was behind me. And Connie says, "For God's sake, Steve, don't you order no banana split." She was going to have to make everyone of one. First thing I want to get straight is F-I-S-H spells fish. Notice they call them fish over here, and they tell me I can't talk, but I say fish. But I know we were in there loading fish one day. I said fish now, not fish. And a boat named the Flossie B came in, and he had a flounder that went over 200 pounds. I know you've heard some good fish stories, but this one's the truth. But it was a winter flounder, a halibut, that he caught in a little swice trap. And since I've moved over here, that was Jennings Beecham, and he had pictures of it before he passed away. We used to be good friends, and I saw it. But that was quite a flounder for be caught in a swice trap anyway. But behind the dye building was another little building, and he could do anything with a piece of metal. Like, back there then we didn't have any. There weren't no such thing as electric pumps on a boat. It was pumped by hand, and the bottom of your pump would wire out, because that's the one set in the water the most. And take it old fella by the name of Barney, and he could do anything he could make your old pump look like a new one when you got through. But he was the dirtiest man I think I don't think he's had a bath since his mama gave it to him. But he could do something with an old pump. You remember Barney? But anyway, you come on up the street, and there was right there to the other restaurant was another big store, and you could get anything you want, like oilskins, boots, and stuff. Reedville was just a great place not only for a waterman, for anybody, but I thought for a waterman especially. Right alongside of that, just about, was Butler's Railway. Well, that was my dad's favorite. Of course, we could walk down the end of Reedville or anywhere you want. Now, her daddy had a railway down in Fairport, and when you got down there,
Didn't have the attractions that
no.
Reedville had.
But the one thing about kept memory, at lunchtime he'd say, "Come on now, Will, let's go over and get lunch." Your uncle had a factory or something next door, and that's the first time I ever ate from a black person. And that big apple pie he had up there on the bench, I done all right with the beans, but I did all right with that pie even better. But of course, and they had a movie theater. I don't know, did that ever have a name or not? The Han Germans had a name for it. But from one side to the other, they had a 3/4 bolt rod running, and it come together with a big turnbuckle right in the middle. Well, while they were warming those machines up, that light coming through that hole up there in the projector room shone right, and that's all you could see on the screen was the turnbuckle. And that's what we used to call it, going up to the turnbuckle tonight. So, and I know one time the boys used to, I don't guess I ought to say this, it might be some of Fred might be in, but they used to row across the creek for outboard motors to come to the movies. And there used to be a bunch of them that come from down below and then across from your way in a skiff. So one night, several of us pulled one of the skiffs up, and we nailed a fish box to the bottom of it and put it back overboard. Then we listened to them. One fellow says, "Pull that stern line in, we're towing something." He says, "It ain't overboard, it's right there in the bottom." I hope that weren't your skiff. When I see you, I said, I better not tell that. But it was, Reedville was something else. But then, years later, of course, how I moved over here, Captain Fred Haney had an engineer, second engineer, that had quit and was taking a chief engineer's job with Captain John Larry. Well, I would have wanted to go fishing some kind of bite on them big rigs. So I knew Captain Fred, but I didn't know Henry. And Henry Davis, quite a guy. I still indebted to him. But Captain Fred was sitting at the soda fountain down there, and I walked up to him, nobody around. I said, Captain Fred, I hear your second engineer's quit. I was wondering if you could help me get a job on there. I'd love to get on that boat. He kind of talked through his nose. Well, he says, I'll see what I can do. That's how he talked. And, well, in the meantime, this other guy was sitting back there to a booth. When Captain Fred left, he came up. That was Henry. He said, do you really want an engineer's job? I said, yes, that I do. He said, well, I'm the one who gave up the job with Captain Fred. Would you be interested? I said, yes, sir. And quite a guy he was, too. And so I had, the first summer, we fished up to Wildwood, and we only got home every other weekend. Well, I was the only one had to go down to Eastern Shore instead of come to Reedville. Well, I had never drove. I drove in the Army. I drove a truck while I was in the service. That was a story in itself. But so I said, I was up there 8 weeks before I got home first time. I said, I got to get a car or I ain't gonna get home at all. So I went and bought me I think it was anyway, it was a Ford, 51 Ford, what he was. And I came down to Eastern Shore. And some of them people that was behind me, I'm sure, were wondering if I ever made it. But anyway, I made it. But then the next year, I had to be over. I guess I'm talking too much.
Oh, no.
The first winter, I had to be over here to overhaul my engines to get ready for next summer. So I commuted back and forth in a little open boat. And every Saturday, after we'd work till 12 o'clock Saturday, then I could go home. And every Saturday, it seemed like it was blowing a gale. Well, I just about a tan German would get drowned going home, but never was one got drowned leaving home. But so the next winter, I came over here, so I bought Marguerite, my wife. I said, she had never been off the island. She had never rode an automobile. And so we came over here, and Lyle, Henry's wife, took her to Kilmarnock in the car. Well, when they come that spring, we had just built a little home on the island, and it was time to go back because we were getting ready to go up north, and she refused to go. So she wasn't about to go back there. I don't think she even went back when we sold the house. But anyway, she loved it over here. And we sold the little house on the island, and I came over here.
What year was that, Steve? You remember what year that was about?
What's that?
What year was that?
55. Yeah, 55, Charles. But we pulled up to the dock with my furniture, and I went up to Mr. Weaver's. I knew him. And I asked him, I said, Mr. Weaver, do you know anybody who's got a truck that would get my furniture up the road? I had rented a house from Mr. and Mrs. Bud Forrester. Lloyd, David Lloyd lives there now. Had 9 rooms, 2 halls, and a bath, $25 a month. Yeah. So he says, no, but he had an old Buick coupe in a trailer. He hooked that trailer up and gassed that Buick up. He says, can you drive? I said, yeah, I drove all last summer. So that's how I got my furniture up the road. And but so we did. And Marguerite loved it. Well, the house that we lived in was a nice home, but the people that lived there before me, his wife was an invalid, and they heated with coal, and everything had to be scrubbed. Well, he worked hard. He was a hard-working man, and he had to do all the housework, and I think he's about like I am, housekeeping. But we had to scrub and paint. The bushes had grown up to, you couldn't even see the water behind the house. So anyway, I'd keep working on that till I got my lawnmower. I could run right down. So we knew Mr. and Mrs. Bud Forrester was coming back. He was an engineer in a hotel up in the Washington area, and we knew that he was coming back when he retired. So I was cutting grass down the back there. Marguerite came down. She said, "Steve, come on up to the house. Mr. and Mrs. Forrester's up here. They want to talk to us." I says, "Oh boy, we just will start packing." So anyway, I got up there, and Mrs. Forrester says, "Mr. Pruitt, we've been talking, and we feel like we're charging you too much money, so we're going to charge you $20 a month." So you can't get that today in Reedville. Well, I'm about talked out, but now Faye's sitting here. Her father, I don't know whether I'm taking anything away from him, but he owned a Menhaden fish boat. You can talk forever on about your family. You ain't hardly said nothing. But
I don't leave all my life story everywhere.
well, there's a guy over there. He can pump you till you don't. No, tell him more than you know yourself, and he don't tell you nothing. So, but down to Cape Memories Railway, I know we were hauled out there one time, and the cradle jumped the track. Well, that was a mess. But he had a guy working with him, Red Pittman. You know Red?
Oh, yeah.
Well, as soon as Cape Memory hollered down, come Red running, and overboard he went. He knew that was his place, overboard. So overboard he plunged and asked no questions. But better hold off on that one. Like I say, it was Pop's second home, and we had to love it if we didn't want to or not, because he had 2 boys and 5 girls. He carried me aboard the boat just soon as school was out. As far back as I can remember, I couldn't work on deck, but I could keep the pilot house clean, wash the dishes, and fill the work keg up. And that was my job. And steer, he'd set me up on that stool and make me steer. And I don't know, sometimes at night, we used to go down as far as Edenton, North Carolina, and load with watermelons. And it didn't have to be much wind when we got up around Rappahannock that he wouldn't beat her and get her to Reedville. Then he wouldn't go in Kilmarnock or Deltaville. It was Reedville to him. But, and it was a great place, and the people were always, well, he fished over here with a lot. He fished one of the boats for a couple of years, the McKeever brothers. She's a hotel now, a big restaurant up in Delaware now. No? Yeah, Delaware, up above Seaford or somewhere in there.
Yeah, it's on the C&D Canal, isn't it? Up there.
Yeah. But he loved it. And we had to love it, because that's where we were coming if we loved it or not.
We do have his nephew, Bill Pruitt, who has kindly come up to add any comments he has or answer any questions. While he's coming up, I don't know whether everyone knows it or not, but that house that Steve was renting for $20 a month, you can go right down the street and buy it this afternoon for, I think, just under $800,000. Go ahead, sorry.
Well, thank you, first of all, for inviting me here. And it is mixed feelings and emotions that I have after looking at that. It would be 2 years in August that he passed away. He was more like a brother to me, even though he was 15 years older than he was an uncle, especially the last 25 or 30 years. We became the same age. You know how that is. And I would just like to mention a couple of things. I take up first on the heritage part of it. Exactly what he was saying was that Reedville and the Reedville area and the people have always been special to our family. As he said, his father, my grandfather, Will Pruitt, was the captain of a fish boat. Matter of fact, he was captain when Alan Haney came back home from Virginia Tech. And my grandfather asked Alan Haney, he said, "Who are you, boy?" And he told him who he was, and he said, "Well, you're just small potatoes here now." Of course, years later, when I worked with Alan Haney, I found out he wasn't small potatoes, but a wonderful man too. And also, my father and grandfather and Steve, they looked up to fishboat captains. Fishboat captain was the elite, and in my opinion, should remain that way today. My daddy, for example, he worked with Captain Wallace Lewis, Dr. Lewis's father. By the way, Captain Dixon, Dr. Emery Lewis got a little nervous when they were talking about old girlfriends or old neighbors in the audience here. So he was glad they didn't pull that on him like they did you. But anyway, Captain Wallace, the year that he retired and ended his career as a fishboat captain, he never did quit, as you know. He ran a party boat till he was 90-something. He called Daddy back on the stern. They were coming around the Capes. They'd been up Lewis, Delaware fishing. And he says, William, I just want you to know I'm hanging it up this year, but I'll help you. I've talked to Peck, and we believe you can fish this boat. He said, Captain Wallace, when you step off of this boat, I'm stepping off of her. And he did. He retired from fishing the same time. So Steve's connection with that was his grandfather and his brother. My dad was 10 years older than Steve. And the other thing that caught my attention was the part in the video about his driving a car. That was always an experience, and even when I came along, there was no driver's education, certainly on Tangier. You know, I mean, you learn, most of us learned like he did in the Army, what little bit we learned there. And Steve was fishing out of Akron, and it was 1963, the summer of 63. Bruce Gordy, one good friend of mine on Tangier, and I were going to summer school at William and Mary. And we came over with the fishermen, and we were hitchhiking to Williamsburg from here on Sunday afternoon. We made good time to Burgess, and we finally got over to Wacomico Church. And that's where we ran out of rods. It was thundering a little bit in the distance, and this car came by. It was a Falcon. And I said to Bruce, Bruce, that looks like Steve. And he must have recognized us, so he pulled over. And he said, what in the world are you doing? Why didn't you call me? I said, no, I knew you were fishing. I didn't know what time you had to leave. And so he said, well, I'm going to Akron to get on the boat. I'll take you down that far. And then he said, I can't let you go to Williamsburg, like get out on this road. You'll never get to Williamsburg. He said, can you drive? Now, he didn't ask me if I had a license. I said, yeah, I think I can drive her. This was the kind of heart he had in him, though. It was a brand new Falcon. We went down to Akron, put him on the steamer. I took that car down to Williamsburg and got my license that week, but as he said, that's another story. I won't bore you with that. But he said, now, Bill, I'm getting in Saturday, so be up here Saturday because I need my car. I said, I'll have it to you Saturday no matter what I have to do. And I came up. Marguerite didn't know anything about this. And I pulled up, and I made the mistake of going to their house first. Should never have done that. Well, when she found out what Steve had done, jeopardized his license and his car and everything. But that's the kind of man he was. That's just a little example. What he said about Reedville and its people was the last. I never had a conversation with him that he didn't mention that. And it didn't matter if they were come-heres or whether they were born here. If you lived in Reedville, and Reedville to him, by the way, like most Tangiermen, Reedville means everywhere over here. Fleeting, down here at the Fairport, and the whole area, Burgess is Reedville. And his dear friend who really helped him in the later days, Ben Schultz and his lovely wife, he would talk about them the same way he would talk about Captain Charlie Williams or Manuel Haney. He just looked up to the people over here and loved them. He thought that Captain Charlie Williams was a hero to him, Manuel Haney was a hero to him, and I could go on and on. And his experience with coming to Reedville, all of us had that experience. I think some of you have heard me when I spoke at the dedication down here several years ago when I was in office. I remember the first time I came into Reedville, and it was like Steve, I thought I was entering New York Harbor. It was the greatest sight I had ever seen, all the boats lit up and everything. But I want to thank you for what you all meant to him, and I hope that you'll never forget him. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Pruitt? Yes, sir.
I'm Grayson Palmore, and I'm from Richmond, Virginia. And years ago, I first came down here. I was over at Buzzard Point Marina with Stanley Bowers. And I met Steve. And that was a real occasion. And so when Steve kind of got off a little bit, I asked Stanley, I says, well, what kind of fella is he? He said, he's a waterman. I said, well, what kind of waterman? He said, I'd go across the Chesapeake Bay on a 2x4 with him. So I guess that kind of answers the question about what kind of a fella Steve was, that Stanley would speak like that of him. And I can remember going over there, and we go fishing. And Steve and I'd get there, and Stanley would be there. He was always around, had them bad knees, always wanted to sit down. And we'd sit there and talk all day long, never get the boat out the barn. So, Steve was a great man.
Thank you, sir.
My name is Ben Stultz, and I'll give you a little bit about, I'm a come here. And when the wife and I were talking about moving to the Reedville area, we lived up in near Washington, D.C., out in Friendly, Maryland. And some people we knew, not good friends, said, Ben, you don't want to move down that area. And I said, why is that? They said, well, they're very clannish people down there, so that they'll call you, come here, and you won't be accepted, and all these things. And I thought, well, I don't want to try it. That hadn't been a problem. Let me tell you, folks, we've been welcomed since the day we got here, and I want to thank you for that. I've never felt like I come here. I know I'm one, but I was family, and I appreciate that. And the reason why I want to talk was Steve was my friend. He was my buddy. And I could tell you a lot of tales about Steve that probably you would know of them. Some of them he told me privately, and I'm not going to tell you those. But, you know, I was his pastor for about a year, and I was a Sunday school teacher much longer than that. And Steve said to me one day, Steve loved ladies. He kidded and cut up, and that was as far as Steve went, and I mean that. But he said he'd never met a, I guess he cut me off. Did you do that, Steve? He said he never met an ugly woman. He said he met some that was not as pretty as others, but he never met an ugly one. One day Steve told him, I'm going to tell this tale on you, Steve, but he owes me anyway. I won't talk about that. But when I walk into heaven, Steve's going to run because I got something I want to get him for. But he told me, he said, I've got a golf cart I was given. And I said, you were given a golf cart, Steve? And he said, yeah. I said, it runs? And he said, well, it does right now. I don't know how long it's going to run. I said, well, where did you get it? And he said, they gave it to me at Tides Inn. And I said, really? They gave you a golf cart? And he said, yeah, that's another story. I said, well, maybe you better tell me. And he was riding the golf cart down the pier, and some gal walked by in a bikini. Steve run the golf cart over the end of the pier into the water. They gave him the golf cart. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming, and thank you to our three participants. And I think between the three of them and what they presented, and particularly what Steve presented also, that we have a feeling for why we love Reedville as much as we do. And we'll continue to do these little sessions like this in order to keep that history going and keep the culture going and so forth. So thanks very much for coming. We do have some soft drinks over here if you need to wet your whistle. And we've got the 9-barrel gun model up here for you to look at if you'd like. And we've got our 3 participants who will answer specific questions, I'm sure. Thanks for coming.
Good night, Irene. Good night, Irene. I'll see you in my dream. Last Saturday night I got married. Me and my wife settled down. Now me and my wife are parted. I'm gonna take another stroll downtown. Let me hear it now. Irene, good night. Irene, good night. Good night, Irene. Good night, Irene. I'll see you in my dream.
Sometimes I live in the country. Sometimes I live in town. Sometimes I take a great notion to jump into the river and drown. Well, Irene, good night.
Try some harmony.
Irene, good night.
Good night, Irene. Good night, Irene. I'll see you in my dream.
He caused me to weep, he caused me to mourn, caused me to leave my home. But the very last words I heard her say was, please sing me one more song.
Irene, good night. Irene, good night. Good night, Irene. Good night, Irene. I'll see you in my dream.
Stop rambling. Stop your gambling. Stop staying out late at night. Go home to your wife